All right. Welcome. I am James Oliver Jr., co-founder and CEO of Kabila. Kabila connects co-founders, overlook co-founders to capital and each other. We're raising a $5 million fund to invest in founders in our ecosystem, in our community. We connect you with our co-founder matching app, and we have a community of badass overlooked founders. So I am super excited today because we do these things on a regular basis, and the whole point is to try to help early stage founders, especially overlooked founders, level up. And today is no exception. So I have a very good friend of mine, Abraham J. Williamson. He's a high growth startup attorney, managing partner of Williamson LLC. He's our attorney at Kabila. And as I said, a great friend and a great human. I'm going to bring him up to the stage. What's going on, Abraham?
It's going well, James. It's good to see you again. Although this is, I think, our fourth year of knowing each other, and I'm excited for today's conversation.
Yeah, 100%. I think we met back during COVID, and when I first started the Parentpreneur Foundation, which is a Parentpreneur Foundation exists to empower Black parentpreneurs so they can leave a legacy for their beautiful Black children. So that's like God's work. That's purpose work. Never going to stop doing that. So still doing that, and I know you were super helpful to a lot of the founders in our community there, and I know you got a lot of clients, happy clients, as a result of the work that we're doing over there too, right?
Absolutely. It's been a mutually beneficial relationship. I think it started off by me just resharing one of your posts. And it's funny because both of us now are talking about social capital a lot and we're living it.
100%. Yeah, I mean that's interesting comment you made there about social capital, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to get right into it. But if you're out there listening in, if you could let us know where you're coming in from in the chat, and also please share this with your followers on social media because we're streaming on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, a bunch of different places. If you could please share this with your followers on social media so they could join the conversation, so founders can join this conversation, and drop your questions and comments in the chat. We will do our best to get to all of them. So, in terms of social capital, though, I know, especially with overlooked founders, everybody's so concerned about getting to capital, getting to capital. Yeah, that's important, but I think social capital is as important, if not more important than financial capital, because social capital actually leads to financial capital.
Absolutely. And I think social capital, it speeds things up, and haste does make waste. You want to be deliberate in what you're doing, but when you have social capital and can access it, it can really help you out of a pinch. It can shorten the timeline of things, and it can put you in rooms that you otherwise wouldn't be in, whether it's you physically or your reputation.
100%. Thank you so much, Erica. We appreciate you for sharing. Facebook's looks like that's awesome. And we got Kenneth coming through on LinkedIn. Sharon, hey, could you please share that? Thanks for sharing, popping in and joining us, Kenneth. We appreciate you, my friend. So look, we're here today because you know there are lots of things that I know Abraham sees, and mistakes that he sees early stage founders make. We were joking at the top before we came on how the legal stuff is not the sexy stuff, right? It's not, we do conversations with investors. We have so many founders on the call. Like we'd had 20 people already. I'm coming in from here, coming in from there. Like we love the sexy stuff, the money, money, money. But if you're not buttoned up legally, it could actually keep you from getting to the bag that you want. So we're going to talk about a couple things, three things that Abraham's seeing right now that founders are missing and should be considering. And we'll take your questions. Drop in the comments if you have questions, and we'll do our best to get to every single last one of them. So without further ado, let's get into it, man. What are you seeing, bro?
Sure. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, and feel free to ask any questions in the chat and we will get into whatever topics you all want. But I wanted to talk about like the team and the hiring, because that's something that everybody does for the most part, regardless of whether you're taking on investment or not. You're going to have people on your team. And what I see is you got a few options. You're hiring employees, contractors, maybe advisors, and interns. And I don't know if it's that this time of year or what, but a lot of people are looking at bringing on interns. And often what I hear people saying is, oh, I'm just going to get, 3, 4, 5 interns. They're going to be unpaid and I'm going to teach them and show them and they'll get exposure. And I've had unpaid internships in the past when I was in college as well. But that can be rife with challenges and issues, because if you aren't paying interns, you potentially could raise some red flags with the Department of Labor as they look at whether or not they're really just employees that you're not paying. So what are ways you can, kind of look at that? Well, they're going to look at a number of factors, but the main one that I wanted to talk about today was making sure that if you are going to hire interns and they're in school, to see if you can get school credit for the work that they're doing for you, and or that it's tied to what they're actually doing. So if you have, a computer scientist or a marketer, but they're doing, data management or data entry, that may not work out so well for you. So that's the one topic that I've seen multiple times come up where people would want to hire interns. Another one too is,
Before you jump into the second
yeah,
one,
go ahead.
anybody out there listening have any questions or comments about hiring interns, like paperwork around hiring interns? Because I hear this a lot. Like we co-work out of Atlanta Tech Village here often, and I see people posting in there all the time about hiring interns. Any interns? They're going over to Georgia Tech, over to Morehouse, etc. Excuse me, trying to find interns. So, are there anybody out there have any questions about interns and hiring interns, or any specific paperwork things they need to be concerned about, Abraham, when they're doing that?
Well, just to have like an intern agreement, and this is true for the most part any service provider relationship. You're going to have an agreement that sets out here are the terms, and we'll get into that in a second. And then also here are I'll describe them as sort of like the due diligence issues to make sure that they're assigning the IP that they're working on to the business. Because what you wouldn't want is for them to be working on something and either claim that it's their own or take it somewhere else, which is another topic I want to talk about later today. But I would say just make sure you have that core agreement, and that agreement or another one they sign has the IP assignments and confidentiality
Right.
and such.
So those agreement, they could probably find things like that. Is it Cooley Go or Go Cooley? What's that website?
Cooley Go, they do have a number of resources, and I would typically start there if you're just looking for documents, templates, even explanations. They're a great resource. But if the people are watching this want to reach out for like an intern agreement, then that's something that we can do,
Oh,
because
dope.
you can have the templates and they're readily available online globally. But if you want a lawyer working on it, which I would always advise for you to at least consider if you can have the budget for it, to at least have a lawyer look over it, because templates are just that, they're not customized for you.
Perfect. So up on the bottom, you can connect with Abraham on LinkedIn. He's at Abraham J. Williamson. Send him a connection request, add a note, tell him that you were watching this and you saw him, and you had a question for him about this. So, all right, that's cool. So that's point number one. What's the second one, bud?
Yeah, another thing too is related to this. So employees and contractors, you've probably beaten this home in a lot of different conversations you've had. Difference, independent contractors, employees, control, and all this. But what I see is that when you bring on an employee, you're creating an obligation to pay them the salary. And a lot of people want to defer that payment or say, hey, we'll pay you later on. We'll pay you when we get the funding or the finances. This is very common. Although you really have to look at the particular state that you're in, because many of the states are different. And in some states, you're required to pay your employees within a certain period of time. So if you're paying them biweekly or you're paying them monthly, you need to pay them within, at least one or two pay cycles, depending on the state that you're in. So they see a lot of people deferring that payment. Sometimes you may be able to structure it differently if you have that. But if you just leave it open, then if that employee leaves because you terminate them or they quit, depending on the state that you're in, all of the money that you owe them could be due when they leave the company, which is different from a contractor relationship. So that's an issue that comes up. That's kind of a sneaky one that you may not realize until that person goes and hires counsel, and now you're in a negotiation.
Oh, wow. And that's different from state to state.
Because employment law often is based on the state. So states do differ. You have some states that do have that rule where all of the compensation is due at the moment of termination. Another, I don't want to say tricky rule, but another rule to be mindful of is if you're providing bonus incentives. Because in some states, if you provide a bonus that is impossible after they're terminated, then that bonus is sort of conceded to that employee. An example of that may be, let's say you have them on a commission, or you have them on a bonus that requires the company to do something that they can't influence. Well, now you've created an obligation that's due when they leave. So stuff like that is just, you have to look at the particular state that you're operating in, and that's something that is easy to overlook.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So This is a good conversation. We're talking with Abraham Williamson, who's a high growth startup attorney, and he's our attorney at Kabila, about 3 legal issues that startup founders typically miss or should be considering. And we're going to do some Q&A. Again, if you're listening out there in the sound of our voices, if you could just drop in the comments or in the chat, let us know where you're coming in from. And also, please share this with the founders on your social media feed so they can hop in and get this information as well. Because again, raising capital, that's the sexy stuff. Talking about legal issues is not the sexy stuff, but it can really get you jammed up as well as keep you from being able to raise capital. So feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or concerns, if there's any things that you're seeing out there that you feel like founders may be overlooking and should be considering. We would love to get Abraham's opinion about that, but just go ahead and drop something in the comments or questions here. All right, so that was the second one. Was there a third one, Abraham?
Yes, there's a third topic I wanted to talk about, and it also involves sort of your team, which is issuing incentives. People want to, you may not have a whole lot of cash, and so you're issuing equity, or you want to issue equity to people who are coming on to your team, whether that's advisors, employees, sometimes even contractors, perhaps even interns, a much smaller piece. And I remember seeing a video where folks were talking about how do you get somebody who is talented enough to go to one of the FANGs, or I think they've revised it now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you get people who could otherwise go to NVIDIA, for example, and get these big salaries to work for you? And it's because you're sort of selling them that this is a very important problem. So in order to do that, people are going to want equity in exchange for doing that work. And there's some issues that can come up with that. So first of all, typically those equity awards are going to come from a plan, an equity incentive plan or a stock option plan. And we use the term so loosely, but it actually is governed by specific regulations. And so when you set up a plan and you issue shares out of it, a lot of us think if they sign that agreement, boom, we promise them the shares, they have it. But that's not the case. There's a separate agreement that details here are your shares and the governing pieces around it. You can't just trade them as easily as you could on the stock market. But the big issue I wanted to talk about was when you're issuing shares, they have to have a price. And there are 2 ways, really one way, but 2 ways to determine that price. The most straightforward and sound way, it's called a safe harbor, is to get a third party, somebody else, to appraise the shares and give you the value, and then you pass that value on to your team. That's called a 409A valuation. That's the cleanest way to do it. But folks may not do that because of the cost. It costs, sometimes over $1,000, sometimes $2,000 to employ people to go through. Even if you have the money and can pay it, sometimes it's not fast enough for people because you have to gather all of your accounting and financial statements sometimes, and like all of this due diligence. If you're not clean there, it can take weeks or longer to get through it. So some people will look for a quicker way. And that quicker way is to have the board do it, the board to determine the value, which is how it used to be done back in the day before 409A valuation was even an option. But that was obviously rife with different, nefarious evaluations.
Sounds political as well in some instances, potentially.
Exactly. It can be challenging. And so you can attempt to do it. It's certainly not the number one way to do it. But if you do go that route, then the board, or more specifically, a committee or your chief financial officer, and this is where it gets people tripped up. Not too many early stage teams necessarily have somebody with CFO experience who has valued a company before, but that's one of the factors, is you want them to have that expertise. And then you look at different valuation methods and you come up with a value per share or price per share for those awards, and then you can issue it that way. So that's just something that comes up. I would definitely recommend having a lawyer involved when you're issuing equity to your team.
Okay, that's good, man. Very good. Any questions out there so far? Again, you can catch up with Abraham on LinkedIn. He's Abraham J. Williamson on LinkedIn. Are you most active on LinkedIn?
I would say so. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way to check it on a daily basis, and I will respond to the LinkedIn messages. Even sometimes, people send me congrats. I'm like, thank you. I do have one more bonus though.
Okay, hang on one second. So also, if you join our Kabila community, Abraham actually moderates a space in our community to get your legal questions answered. So you could pop in. Our community is free. You could go to joinkabila.com and just join our community. And in that space, you can ping it, reach out to Abraham directly. And we talked about we're raising a $5 million fund. Abraham's our attorney. He helped us with our Reg D 506C registration with the SEC, so we could publicly say we're raising a fund. We can't publicly solicit investors for the fund, but we can say we're raising a fund, and we are raising a fund. We have our first committed LP, an important person, so we're excited about that. So that's happening, and once we do raise the fund, we will invest in founders in our community. And right now we're planning to invest up to 10% of your pre-seed round. On average for pre-seed round is $500,000. That's 10% of that is 50,000. We'll do up to 50K. Obviously, we won't be able to do tons more than that because we're only raising a $5 million fund to start. But the thing is, we're not intending to lead any rounds. It'll be similar to the Gangels model. Gangels is actually one of our investors at Kabila along with Techstars. We will invest alongside other investors whom we know, like, and trust, that are mission, vision, and values aligned. And that's how we will invest. And it will be people who we know. And how we know you is because you're in our community and we see you showing up, giving more than you take, giving first. And obviously we need to like the business and all that. But beyond that, we want to, make sure these are good humans that we're investing in, that we, as I like to say, have a high tolerance for the hellacious brutality of being a founder. Oh my God. So here's somebody with a comment here. Is Abraham taking on new startups? Good question.
The answer to that question is yes. I can send you a link if you just reach out on LinkedIn. I can send you a link to a discovery call. It'll just have a couple of questions to answer. Then we'll hop on the call and see, what makes you think you need a lawyer, and if I'm somebody who can help you.
Right. Okay. Cool. Not sure who that is. Sometimes it's weird. It doesn't show who the user is, the person's name. So if you could just, whoever put that question in, if you could just let me know your name, please. Another question here is, where can we find other diverse startup opportunities? Is there an association or group? Good question.
That is a great question. I'm not familiar with like a global or national one, although there is somebody from my law school who has been compiling a list of just resources in general for like services or professionals. And if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, then I can try to get you in touch with that list. But that's a good idea.
You're a law school. He's being super humble. He went to Harvard, right?
Yes. Yeah. Class of 2015. Celebrated my 5th year last year. It's good. It's crazy. It's been that long, but yes.
Hilarious. So that was Hans who asked that question. So who was the person that asked them about the diverse questions? Founders attorney might have been Hans as well. So another question is, how soon should you bring a startup attorney on? Oh, that's a great question.
It is. And when I was kind of first getting into this practice, I was just like, boom, like you got an idea. Let's form the company. Let's move along. But it's a little different, especially in my conversations with folks who are in the Valley, is, you can do a lot before you kind of bring that on. And what I tell folks now is, I mean, if you can, be buttoned up from the very beginning, but as a practical matter, usually it's when folks are taking on their first big check, which I describe as, once you have kind of soft circled $100,000 for investment, or you have a major contract or a corporation is coming on board and they want to see like what you have in terms of your team, that's when it really makes sense. But otherwise, I don't want to be the cost center for you where you spent, a few $1,000s, but you're starting off in the hole.
Yeah, I love that. So I can speak for Kabila. When we went through Techstars, we took the convertible note from Techstars, and so when we incorporated, so this is to your point here, because when we incorporated, I think we just used Gust, right, to manage all that. We paid them a couple $100. They're our agent. They manage all that every year, and so we had all our documents. They have all these documents. We signed all the docs, so all that was done, and then when it came time for us to take on capital, that's when I engaged Abraham to review the agreements, and going forward, any issues, legal issues I had, or as we took on more capital and we, put together convertible notes or safes or what have you, I would have Abraham do all that just to make sure everything is all buttoned up. And if I have any questions about anything that's going on, I reach out to him. If I need him to review a document before I sign it, I do, because like I have ADHD and I can't stand reading any of that stuff. So here's another question here. Please explain the startup winter for Black women founders from a lawyer's perspective. Why is there so little money?
Yeah.
You really? How are you supposed to answer that one?
Yeah, it's tough. What I will say is that yes, it's tough to raise capital just in general. And that's another thing too is, in venture, you're already looking at a very small number of people who are raising. And it's interesting to phrase it as a winter because, I wasn't in the space in earnest from a legal perspective, but I was, starting to get into it in 2019 before the big, boom and all that during COVID and thereafter. And I think this is more of a return to the median, quite honestly, because it was tough back then. You did have some people. It was remarkable. I remember our first app launch party in Harlem. They had raised 1.2 million in their Series A. You know what I mean? That seems crazy to think about today, but in 2019, that was like a really big deal. So, at least in our community, but I can't really necessarily speak to why, other than to say that it is highly competitive and it will get more competitive. People are looking more at profit now. And I saw an article recently that was talking about, your attractiveness. When they did studies on that, makes a difference when people are investing, and it's obviously skewed toward a particular demographic. So I'm not going to be able to solve that for you necessarily. But what I can say is that, sticking with folks like James and getting around more people who have a similar mindset, that's going to put you ahead. And when I was first starting off as a lawyer, people were like, you can't do that. You got to go here. You got to go here. But in my experience, yes, you need to have relationships outside of your community, but you also don't need to abandon your own community.
So Abraham's very politically correct. So I'm going to answer this question for you. Look, I always say jokingly, but seriously, like when VC sneezes or catches a cold, overlooked founders get the Rona. Period. Was it like combined? Women, BIPOC, LGBTQ plus founders get less than 10% of funding. I think I saw last year Black founders got 0.48% of funding. The year before that it was 0.68. So it's getting worse and worse for Black founders. Women founders consistently only around 2%. It's just, and then there's this whole other conversation about should overlooked founders even try to raise venture capital. I don't know. You know Trey Baker, right? From Techstars Tulsa. Trey posted on LinkedIn last week talking about he doesn't think all founders should not be trying to raise VC, and he said in particular, Black founders should not be their only option. So I was like, because I have a podcast called Parents Making Profits, and I had a new co-host, and the very first episode was, should overlooked founders even bother to raise venture capital? So I asked him to come on the podcast and talk about that. And he was like, yeah, sure. He said, only if I could talk about reparations. I'm like, oh, damn. Well, yeah, come on. Sure. Let's have that spicy conversation. Wow. So look, it's, I really want to try to connect with somebody who's great with like bootstrapping. And because the reality is, like Abraham was saying, most people just in general, like take all the nonsense out of it. Only a small percentage of founders are going to get VC funding anyway. So, and not every startup is necessarily VC fundable. So I can speak honestly for Kabila. There's some question about the venture scalability of a co-founder matching app. Like, we'll see, right? But so we had to go back to the drawing board and revise our business model. And, we're raising a fund separately. So it's Kabila Inc. and it's Kabila Ventures. But nobody can question the venture scalability of a venture fund itself. So like once we revised our business model, those questions went away. And oh, by the way, that change to the business model actually helps the rest of the business because as we talked about, what do founders care more than anything? Right? Capital, getting access to capital, especially early stage founders. So that helps top of funnel for everything else that we're doing. So the point is saying all that in addition to just being really transparent with y'all is you have to be creative about how you go to market, how you raise capital, how you get customers, because sometimes you might not actually be able to get like VC funding or even angel funding. Your thoughts?
I mean, I agree with that. Um, like even parents making profits, you're not saying parents raising venture capital, right? At the end of the day, you
No.
got to build a great business, and that's just
Yeah.
kind of been the strategic shift that I have made. I got caught up in the hype, like a lot of other people too. Like go after the funds, like that's sexy. It makes for a better like press release and all that. But when you
Hmm.
really just take a step all the way back and say, what does it mean to build a great business? Now you're seducing not just the VCs, but anyone else who could potentially give you capital. And that's another thing too is because we'll typically go after the names we see everywhere, we may
Yeah.
be overlooking some of the other sources of capital that are right there that could get you to the same number, a little bit more work. But
What are some of those you're talking about?
well, I just mean maybe some of the underlooked funds. It's really hard to find angels for a lot of people, but if you link up with certain groups and communities, they're going to get you in touch with them. You know, I've even seen a number of people do the stacking of different resources from the states. A lot of states will have matching. In fact, in Tennessee, their fund will match. Sometimes it's difficult to get those funds, but there are other resources out there. And then you even see folks as well who have a for-profit company, but they also have a nonprofit company, and that nonprofit company gets them in front of donors who could potentially get introduced to their for-profit as a consequence of that. And I don't know if that's
Yeah.
your experience, but you know, there are ways to get in front of sources of capital.
Interesting. Okay, so a couple quick questions before we roll out here because we're almost at time. What's your opinion on subscription startup legal services like Start.law?
So not familiar with start.law, but I'll speak about that because it's kind of two questions there. There's online legal tools and then there's subscription because sometimes law firms will have subscription models and the subscription models are tough because legal services are irregular. And if you are having monthly legal needs, it's probably going to be more than $500 a month or whatever the subscription package is. But when it comes to using online tools, I say like, you know, a lot of people will come to our practice. They've used LegalZoom or, you know, maybe Cooley Go or Clerky. And what I say is those are good resources if you're just starting off, but venture is a very specific element and having and documents they do change. I mean, for the most part they're the same, but I've even revised some of my agreements recently for new laws, you know, that have come out around, you know, like non-disparagement or non-competes and the such. So you just want to make sure that it's up to date, and you're fine if you eventually get to a lawyer who can clean that up, but there may be some more cost in cleaning it up. If you do, I can't say the name, but I am working with one of these types of companies to be able to leverage the best of both worlds, to use their software, but also use the experience and documents that I have to align those, because I'm not a tech company. They're not necessarily a law firm. So how do we combine that? So if you reach out to me, I am in the process. I'm sort of in this beta program to sort of make that a reality.
Do you have a hard stop at 11:30?
No,
Okay, good. So this next question is going to probably take a second because I have some thoughts, and I know you're going to have some thoughts about it too. Abraham just suggested you reach out to him. It's scrolling on the bottom here. You can reach out to him on LinkedIn at Abraham J. Williamson. That's how you can find him. So his next question is the new to simply go for Reg A, B, C crowdfunding and avoid VC funding? And do you handle crowdfunding, Start Engine, Republic, WeFunder? So before you answer that question, Abraham, I want to share my thoughts, if I may.
please do.
Yeah. So if any of you follow me or you listen to my podcast, parentsmakingprofits.com, a podcast is Parents Making Profits. The website is parentsmakingprofits.com. Or if you're not Kabila community, I've been talking about this lately because, you know, Kabila, you know, we had one of the VPs from WeFunder on the podcast, and he was talking about how to effectively execute a WeFunder campaign. And he inspired me to start a WeFunder. And, you know, I was actually scared to do it because I had PTSD from an Indiegogo campaign I did with my first startup back in 2013 that failed. Right. But I did it. I did all the things I was told to do, and I did it. And I just shut it down 2, 3 weeks ago. Why? Because, you know, our specific crowdfunding was not succeeding, and it actually put me in a bad mental headspace. I was like depressed in Q4 because of that. So I had to shut it down. It turns out that chasing down $100 investment contributions is like death by $1,100 contributions. Turns out that's bad for your mental health. But I will say it wasn't a good fit for us because of the nature of our community. What does that mean? Our community is dope. Our community is overlooked, early stage founders. But the problem with that from a standpoint of a we funder is early stage founders don't have $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 to drop on a we funder campaign, which is what you need actually to anchor your campaign so you can get to that 50K threshold so you can get access to the funds. Now, I contrast that to a good friend of mine, Tamara Lucas. Tamara is also a Techstars alum. She's went through Techstars Atlanta. She has a platform called My Panda. It's a personal assistant next door app. I think that's what that is. She'd be very impressed that I remember that. But she's here in Atlanta, and it's like, concierge service for busy, mostly moms. So Tamara's community is affluent moms, and they supported her We Funded campaign. Like one person who was a friend of a customer, bam, dropped 10 stacks. That's how you do that, right? So if you're going to do a WeFunder or Republic or any of that, think about, so you either need to be very far along already, have significant traction because that's sexy, right? People like that. Oh, okay, cool. They want to invest alongside, Techstars and Angels or any other fancy investors you have. If you have traction, if you're super early stage like pre-seed, that's not going to work, right? It will work though if you have a community of customers who have the capacity, they love you, love your business, and have the capacity, financial capacity to invest in your WeFunder. That's how you would do that. Your thoughts, sir?
I mean, that anecdote I think speaks to a number of the issues, not bad or good, just issues that are involved with crowdfunding. And I'll just say this in the comparison. So I've been an advocate for crowdfunding since sort of the very beginning. I do think it solves a problem, maybe not all problems, but it does have challenges. For example, if you're trying to raise VC, a lot of venture capital investors may balk at investing in a crowdfunding platform. One, you're bringing in a lot of non-accredited investors, but two, because it is a public offering, you're going to have to disclose things that you wouldn't have to disclose in a private offering. And there are ways where you can time out over time, but at least for that first year or so, you're going to be reporting on information that an investor may not want everybody else to have, for example. So that's one of the challenges that comes with it. One of the other issues that used to be the case that many of these companies have solved is having 1,000 people on your cap table now they just put you in a special purpose vehicle. There's one person who votes on your behalf. So they've worked out some kinks, even, and I'm not trying to just make this overly legal, but it is, sort of the legal thing. This broadcast is in terms of integrating your offering. Sometimes people would try to run both a crowdfunding campaign while they're doing a private campaign, and the SEC came out with rules to not allow you to, basically anti-integration rules that these companies have also been able to help companies navigate. So a lot of those initial concerns have been resolved. So that's the first thing. Now let's get to your point on the likelihood of success. What I tell people, or used to tell people, now I may have to revise this even more, is that 50% of the people who are investing, you're going to have to bring. Like, it's mostly a marketing campaign. It's not a fundraiser in the traditional sense. It's a marketing campaign where people who want to be on your team can drop money and get a benefit or a reward.
That's what we did. I sent tons. I sent about 100 or so text messages, emails, etc. That's what you have to do.
And you got in the follow-up too. And I'm not saying, just keep following up, but it's like, if you send out just one message to people, it's tough to scale from their perspective too. There are people who have raised a lot of money. It's too early to tell how many successful startups have exited from the platform because it's a relatively new product. But if you think about it from these companies' perspective, how are they going to, if James comes onto the platform, I come onto the platform, now all of a sudden they have 1,000 companies. How are they all going to get the amount of love that they need to be prioritized in my investor email that I receive on a regular basis? It's just a lot of the work is going to come from you.
100%. So last question, if 60 seconds or less, Abraham, because I know you got to run. What about offshore funds? There are mega millionaires in Africa. Can we find a way to get money from them?
Yes, there are ways. This may be beyond the scope of today's conversation, but you're still going to be looking at SEC rules and regulations, depending on how you go about that fundraise. Now, when you are taking on investment from, you specifically mentioned on the continent of Africa, you're right, there's a lot of investors there. You would want to also engage local counsel in those countries. So I actually do have clients who are based in Nigeria. Specifically in terms of African countries. I can't speak to the other countries, but they have a very robust VC landscape there, more so than I may have initially thought. But the founder community there, they have a lot of great founders there. More people are getting involved, and we have local counsel there. So I handle the U.S. side, they handle the African side, and we kind of come together and we close deals. In fact, closed the Series A with one of the only solo women-led VC funds, I believe, on the continent. So there's definitely opportunities there, but you want to have relationships in that country to help you close that deal.
That's so good. That's such a great answer. I appreciate that question. Not sure who asked it. I suspect that was Hans again. It sounds like a Hans question. Look, if you're in Atlanta, like Abraham's going to be here in Atlanta in person with us on March 5th. We have our Kabila ATL Tech Tuesdays founder happy hour. You get a chance to meet him. We're going to be having a similar conversation, but you can meet him in person. You can meet some really great founders. We have great pizza. Antico's was bomb pizza, good drinks, and we're moving to a new location, Tech Square, Atlanta, right across the street from Georgia Tech. Great parking situation. So we're super excited about it. But I want to say thank you so much, Abraham, for joining us. If you could hang out for 1 second, I'm going to roll this outro video and then just say goodbye to you in the at the end there. So thank you everybody for joining. If you're in our Kabila community, we will post a replay here. And again, we're raising a fund. If you want to have an opportunity to get access to the funds once we close our fund, you need to be in our community. You can go to joinkabila.com to learn more about that. Stand by for the outro. Thanks everybody. We'll catch you later.